If you've ever watched someone get promoted or praised for reasons that had nothing to do with performance, you've seen office politics in action. And it's frustrating, especially when you're the one doing the actual work. Unfortunately, a lot of decisions at work have nothing to do with merit. They're about relationships, visibility, and influence. And if you don't understand how those things work where you are, it's easy to get overlooked or shut out, no matter how qualified you are. Managing organizational politics can feel like you're playing games, or you have to pretend to be somebody you're not. I've had to do that, and it's really frustrating. But really, you need to learn how to navigate the power dynamics without compromising who you are, because you can stay true to your values and be strategic. You just need the right approach. Welcome to Control Your Career. I'm Julia Toothacre, your strategic career consultant, and I'm so glad that you're here. This podcast is all about helping ambitious professionals take control of their career with clarity and confidence. This season, we are talking through real career challenges, and today we're getting into one that comes up constantly in coaching conversations. How do you deal with office politics? And in particular, how do you deal with office politics without feeling like you are selling your soul? Because that's what it feels like, doesn't it? And I know that the word politics makes a lot of people cringe. I know it makes me cringe too. You don't want to suck up. You don't want to play games. That's so frustrating. But office politics are just power dynamics, and you're part of them whether you want to participate in them or not. So in this episode, we are going to talk about how to recognize political patterns at work, protect your energy, and move forward with strategy, not stress. So let's get into it. First, we're going to talk about why politics matter. And for a lot of you, this is going to be some mindset shifting, and it's probably going to be frustrating. So I'm just going to set that tone right from the beginning. So first, most professionals say that they hate politics, but when you avoid them, it can become a real risk to your career. So you might hear yourself saying, I don't want to play these games. I'm not political. I just want to do good work. I want to be promoted based on the good work that I'm doing. I know I've said that before, and it's fine. There are some situations and industries and functions where doing good work will get you promoted. But in a lot of situations, it's really going to be about the politics, and you're going to start getting passed over for opportunities that honestly you've probably earned, but the right people don't know about it, right? So what often gets labeled as politics is really just people who know how to be seen and trusted and connected to the right people, or essentially the decision makers, right? So opting out of politics, it doesn't necessarily take you out of the game. You still might get recognized, especially if there are people who see the work that you're doing, but it might take you completely off the board, right? Because you are not really being strategic about the connections that you're making and the conversations that you are having. You also need to realize that politics are not always toxic. I know it's going to feel that way, especially to some of us who are a little bit more sensitive to self-promotion, but it's really just influence, positioning, and trust. That's how you have to see politics. So you want to understand, especially with your direct supervisor, your direct manager, who do they trust? Who is their go-to person when they need an opinion or they need to make a timely call on something? Who speaks up with confidence in a meeting? I know you know these people. I know that as I'm talking about this, you're like, oh yes, this person is really good at positioning. They have a lot of trust. Are they doing all the work? Maybe, maybe not. but they are a voice that people want to listen to. And they are people who others feel comfortable putting forward for a project. So they're going to get pulled for different things. And it might be for their skill set, but it also might be for the level of influence they have in order to make that project go the way that it needs to go. And that's part of how you build this political capital, right? It can be quiet and consistent without you often realizing that it's happening, but it's really about you being strategic about who you talk to and who you have earned trust from. I think it's important to note that you don't have to suck up to people. And I think that that is sometimes what this gets associated with, but you have to understand where you need to show up and what spaces you need to be in where all these decisions are being made. If you're not in that room, then chances are you're not going to get tapped for any of these opportunities that you might want. And ignorance is not always bliss in this scenario either. If you are unaware of the political dynamics, you are probably being shaped or possibly even manipulated by them. So it's something that you want to be aware of if you haven't been up to this point. This is especially nuanced for new professionals or professionals who are new to an environment. You have to understand how the politics work in that culture. So here's the thing, if you're avoiding politics altogether, whether it's by choice or just being completely unaware, you have to understand that you could be losing different opportunities. You're left out of key conversations. You might be misunderstood or misrepresented by others because you're not in the right rooms or on the right email chains or having the right conversations. And in most cases, you're going to get passed over by somebody else who is just better connected, even if they're less capable. They basically have learned how to talk the talk in order to get them into the right spaces and be able to get those positions. And here's the thing, like, you might not even know that it's happening. You might not even know that people are talking about you or somebody else because it's all behind closed doors. And that's what you have to assume sometimes, that these conversations are happening without you. You likely have seen these meetings. You've seen people go into meetings, come out of meetings. You might have been told something, in passing in the office. But at the end of the day, these politics that are happening, whether you're aware or not, they're going to shape your career, even if you pretend that they don't exist. So we want to definitely become aware of them if we haven't been. And at the end of the day, just knowing how the system works can give you options versus having bad reactions. This is what I see a lot, is people have these really negative reactions to somebody getting a promotion or being put onto a project, likely because you're the one that has done all the work. Or maybe it's even somebody else in the office that has done all the work. And then this other person gets picked to do whatever the thing is, and everybody is frustrated. Well, what that person did really well is they talked to people. They put themselves in front of the right people. They had the right conversations. So you need to recognize that your awareness of the system and who is influential in that system, it gives you leverage. It lets you make intentional choices. It shows you who you need to build relationships with, how to show up in those key moments. We have to be aware of that in various settings that we are in. And it lets you know where to spend your energy. So much of us spend our energy on execution of the work that we do, which, yes, that needs to happen. But there also needs to be energy spent on who we are building relationships with and trying to get into the rooms that we need to be in. So let's state this right now. Political fluency does not mean that we are selling out, okay? It means that you understand how things work in the culture that you're in. It means that you can move forward with a strategy to help you elevate your career and whatever that looks like for you. So you're not going to have a big reaction if things don't go your way because you understand what's going on and why it's happening. But I know, again, the word politics can feel very cringy and it might make you cringe. I know my husband is like that. He hates dealing with any kind of office politics, but you can't ignore it. Your career cannot afford to ignore it. If you want this influence and recognition and access, which is really the name of the game, you need to understand how these decisions get made and who is the ones shaping these decisions. That is where your power is going to start. So let's get into the Control Your Career framework and work through this for your unique situation. Our first stage in the process is going to be realistic reality. And this is where we are looking at what is actually happening in your situation. And for politics, this is going to mean that we're going to have some hard conversations. So you have to understand what political dynamics are going to be at play in your current environment and culture. So here are some questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. First, who holds the informal power versus the formal power? So I'm going to give you an example from my career. So formal power is going to be people who are in leadership positions who either make decisions or who are in rooms when decisions are made. So they're not necessarily at the top, but they are very influential in the organization. So you need to understand what that formal power is. And sometimes it's your manager, right? So you have to figure that out for yourself. But informal power, that is what you really need to figure out. So these are people who are likely more quiet and behind the scenes. And I'm going to tell you, if you are not friends with your administrative staff, you are making a huge mistake. When I was in higher education, the people that I really tried to create strong relationships with were administrative staff, the executive assistants, basically anybody who controlled the calendars of people that were decision makers. And these were not relationships that were frivolous. I truly built relationships with these people because they knew what was going on. They understood the dynamics. They were a part of those dynamics. And so those are the people that you really want to have those positive relationships with because they have so much influence. And I'm going to tell you, I've worked in some high level areas within organizations. Those VPs, CEOs, all of that, they are talking to their executive assistants. They are talking to the people around them, even if they don't have the right title. They are talking to those people to see how people were interacting with them, what it was like, all of that. So you have to understand your informal and formal power within your structure and organization. You need to figure out whose opinion matters most. So who gets looped into these decisions. So sometimes it is going to be a formal line of structure. Other times there are just people who get brought in. And sometimes this would be considered informal power, but a lot of times people know that these people have power. So it is well known in the organization, but you have to understand who those decision makers are or who is most influential so that, again, you can be in those rooms or you can have conversations with those people. Oh, this is so important. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I know we're like multiple episodes into this season, but I have outlines for these. I cannot speak off the cuff this long. I go off on tangents. So I have outlines to keep me straight and to keep me going if you're wondering why my speech pattern is the way that it is. But are there cliques, gatekeepers, or unspoken alliances? I am going to tell you, working in a corporate environment or any kind of just environment where there's people, there are going to be cliques. And these are all different, right? So a clique is basically people who come together, whether they're on the same team or not. They might not be. They might be from different areas, but they come together for some purpose and they have a lot of influence, or they're able to just move information around in a way that, can help or hinder. Gatekeepers, when I talked about executive assistants earlier, a lot of those admin executive assistants, they are gatekeepers for the people that they report to. And so you have to have a good relationship for that with them or with that person to be able to get past them, because I'm going to tell you, you will get blocked. So you have to understand who those gatekeepers are. And then I think one that's really important and harder to figure out are the unspoken alliances. So this is what happens a lot of times when we are on teams that are cross-functional. And so now we have developed good rapport with somebody in another part of the business that has our back and we have their back, and it's an unspoken alliance. And so we are going to support them in meetings. They are going to support us in meetings. And it's just something that is known. So you might have that for yourself, but you also want to try to pinpoint who has that in other areas so that, again, you understand where some of the influence is coming from. And then you want to think about, how have you been avoiding someone or something because it feels too political? And again, we're using politics in the work sense, right? So working within your organization, not politics within the government. That's totally different. But what have you been avoiding? And so this is part of really understanding your place in this. And so earlier, that was something I asked too. Are you avoiding this? And so for realistic reality, we have to be able to ask ourselves, is it me? Am I holding myself back because I'm unwilling to play the game, quote unquote? Or do I just not have enough information? So you have to figure out what that is for yourself and be really honest, because that's going to help you build the strategy moving forward. And here's the thing, we have to recognize this, because you can't navigate something that you refuse to see. So you can get frustrated over the decisions that are made, but if you refuse to understand why those decisions are made or ask questions to help yourself understand, then you're not ever going to be able to navigate the political landscape of the organization that you are in. Okay. So another prompt, just to close out realistic reality, is where are the political dynamics showing up and how are they affecting your opportunities? So I want you to look at your current position and do that evaluation for yourself. If you're not sure in your current position, or you're still trying to figure out how politics work, think about past positions. Think about a time when somebody got a position that they didn't deserve, somebody else should have gotten it. Think through some of those scenarios that you've had, or maybe somebody in your life has had, and that's going to help you understand what to start looking for in your own situation. All right, an identity analysis is going to be part of stage 2, and this is where we're going to dig a little bit deeper to try to figure out how to manage some of this for yourself. So you're going to hear me ask a question similar to this. I've asked it a few times already, but it's because we have to get to the heart of it. How are you naturally moving through power dynamics? So I want you to think about the team that you're currently on, your relationship with your manager. How are you managing any of those power dynamics? Do you understand when they show up? Do you understand your role versus your manager's role? Do you see other people and how they're operating? And so what are you doing? And how does that align with who you actually are? So something that's hard for me is I'm actually very merit-based in terms of just my value system. I believe that you need to work for the things that you want in life. I believe that at work, if we are, doing the job and doing well and we want to get promoted, there should be a path for that, right? And it should be based on the work that we're doing. This idea of politics and having to, schmooze this person and build a relationship here and there is so exhausting to my personality type. And so it can be very hard for me to recognize this and do this. And so that's something that I'm very aware of. And I have to be very consciously intentional when I'm building relationships, and I have to be really looking at the dynamics of the room. And I've had to train myself to do that. I did not do that well early in my career. So a couple of things to look at to help you identify this. Do you lean into relationships within your organization, or do you avoid anything that might seem political? And sometimes we get, something put on our calendar and we're trying to figure out, why do we have this conversation? What's going on? And sometimes it's a way for us to be strategically involved, but we don't want to deal with it. And so we can't be doing that. Some people really like to separate their work and their personal life, which I think is fine. And I think you have every right to do that. So this isn't me telling you need to bring your personal life into work, but you need to build relationships at work. And so those don't have to be based on your personal life, but there has to be some type of relationship building versus this, like, I'm going to keep my head down, I'm going to do my job. That works if you don't want promotion. So if you don't want promotion, then do that. It's fine. But if you want promotion, you have to understand how you're functioning in the workplace when it comes to relationships. Think about your communication style, especially when you are in a high stakes meeting or cross-functional situations or projects. Those are the times that you really need to shine. If you are uncomfortable with that, if you know that you've messed up in the past, or maybe you just don't feel like you have those communication skills, that's going to be a goal for you. Okay. So that's going to be a goal in stage 3. But that is a lot of times what I find is the barrier for most people is they don't know how to speak up in meetings. They don't know how to articulate what they've done or the situation. And so that's a really great learning opportunity for you if that fits for you. Here's another thing that I think is really good to know about yourself. Are you someone who builds quiet trust, or do you seek visible influence? So people who seek visible influence are usually the people that you see the most, but you don't have to be that way if that's not comfortable for you. You can also build quiet trust, but that still requires relationship, conversation, communication, all of that. So understanding where you shine the most is going to be helpful. I was not a visible influence person, but I saw people who were, and they were so good at it. I was a quiet trust person. So I liked having conversations on the side before the meeting, after the meeting, maybe a secondary meeting to whatever we were talking about. That's where I did a lot better than being really vocal in a larger meeting. And then think about your values and how this connects to this topic. Do you have any values that support this, or do you have any values that really contradict what we're talking about today? That could also be a barrier for you. I'm not saying that you have to go against your values, but you have to understand how your values might be impacting your situation. And then we might have to make some compromises based on that. And here's the thing, like, you can engage in the politics without becoming someone you're not. And I want to be really firm on that. You just have to understand who you are and how you are going to best navigate these political situations. So for me, like I said, it was one-on-one conversations and meetings. It was not me being, the big voice in the room or going to something after work. That was never going to be me. And so I had to figure out how to do that in a different way. So that's what you have to do, is figure out which scenario is going to work for you best based on your personality. Something else to bring into this that I don't necessarily want to take this particular episode off course, but you have to understand the types of workplace relationships that feel natural to you and the ones that feel forced. And is the culture that you're in the right culture for that? And so it might not be. And then we're having a conversation of, is this the right position? Which I'm not going to get into that for this particular episode, but I just want to put that in there, if you feel like you're constantly fighting against the culture or your style doesn't match the culture, that's a sign that we might need to explore some other things, but not in this episode. Okay, stage 3 is all about goals. We are talking about your purpose-driven plan. So we've figured out the realistic reality. We've looked at your personality. And so now we want to figure out what the actual goal is. So as you know, if you've listened to past episodes, this is really going to be about what works best for you based on what you evaluated in stage 1 and 2. However, because I don't know what you evaluated in stage 1 and 2, I'm going to give you just some common goals related to this topic that could be helpful to get you started if you were unsure of where to go after going through stage 1 and 2. So first, our core question for stage 3 is going to be, what kind of influence or access do you need to grow? So where is that gap in your current career? You have to figure that out, and that's going to be likely one of the primary goals. Who do you need better relationships with and why? So we talked about gatekeepers. We talked about, executive assistants. We talked about those people who seem to have some kind of influence, but we're not quite sure why. So think about who that might be and then set some goals to start to build relationships with those people. Is there a group that's making decisions or a leader that you need to be closer in proximity to so that you are part of the conversation or so that you are invited in to whatever that group is? I know back when I was in higher education, one of the things that as a staff member you always wanted was to be in a room with faculty. Anytime that you could be in a room with faculty was so helpful because it allowed faculty to see you as a partner, as a thought leader, and you were able to really show your worth. For those of you who have been in education, there's a lot of faculty members who sometimes can be a little bit judgmental towards staff. And that's usually because there is a difference of education and expertise and all of that. But when you were able to get in the room and really show them who you were and what you had to offer, a lot of times I found that the most invaluable. So that's a situation that you have to figure out for, the environment that you are in. So another goal to consider is, what does strategic visibility look like for you? And so again, this is looking at your specific situation, taking in stage 1 and stage 2 and going, okay, here's what I'm seeing. Here's where I think the gaps are. And, strategic visibility might start with, I need to change my mindset. I need to change my mindset around politics and become more comfortable. And that starts with observation. And so our first goal is going to be, I need to change my mindset around office politics, right? And then we talk about the actions associated with that. And so it can be that simple. It doesn't have to be, oh, I need to meet the VP. You might not be able to meet the VP, right? But how do we have these strategic conversations? It might be, I need to build a better relationship with my manager because I know they're not advocating for me. So I need to understand who they are. I need to understand what they want so that I'm brought into meetings, so that I'm a topic of conversation in a positive way when it comes to promotions and projects and all of that. And I think it's important to note here that not all visibility is going to be self-promotion. So your goals don't need to be necessarily oriented toward self-promotion, though that is likely going to be some of it at some point. But sometimes you just need to be in the right room or have the right conversation to be able to articulate your expertise, to be able to articulate what you've already done and what you bring to the table. So to wrap up stage 3, because I know there's a lot of different ways that goals can go, I want you to think about what is one connection that you have or that you need to make that could essentially shift your access or your opportunities within your organization. So if you're not quite sure where to start, that is the place that I would start when it comes to goals for this topic. Now let's move to stage 4, which is initiate action. So obviously stage 3 and stage 4 are very connected, but again, I don't know your unique situation. So I'm going to give you some actions that I think are really common for this topic. And I think it's important to know, and I dealt with this a lot in my earlier career. When you're building relationships with people in an organization, I want you to think about it as strategy and not manipulation. For a long time, I felt like I was manipulating people. And I think that's because my personality type actually lends itself to that. And I was really worried that I was trying to manipulate a situation more than I wasn't, right? Like it just felt weird to me. And I was trying to navigate that as best I could without losing my integrity. And I think the fact that I was even thinking about that means that it was strategy over manipulation. But I want to make that really clear for some people who might feel like this is a manipulation tactic. It's really not. It's strategic. You have an end goal. You know where you're trying to be, what you're trying to do, and that's what makes it more of a strategy. Okay, so here are some actions that I want you to think about. Think about who you're already connected to or who you have been connected to in the past, even if it's been in passing. So it could be somebody that does have a lot of influence that you were in a meeting with. And I want you to reach out to them and say, hey, we were in a meeting together a while back, and I was really impressed with XYZ. I would love to get together again and talk about ABC. So it's opening the door for a conversation and seeing if you can make that happen and understanding why. So that's part of the goal setting, right? Your goal setting is to talk to this specific person because of whoever they are, whatever connections they have, but it is going to be a genuine connection, and that's how you have to view it. One thing to consider when you're in meetings, this is a small action and also helps with communication, is I want you to start sharing updates that show your thinking and not just the results. So a lot of times we get pegged in meetings to share out what is happening and the results of that. But you want to also think about, how do I talk strategically about what I'm doing? How do I talk about how I got to this conclusion or why we're making some of these decisions? That I find a lot of times is what sets people apart from being, a workhorse in an organization versus somebody who gets into leadership positions. And then another really good action is observation. So look in different meetings that you have, watch people, watch how they navigate, watch how they gain trust, watch how they manage maybe a tricky conversation, watch how they speak about themselves. Remember, we talked about who those people are that are really good at being more visible in meetings and in the organization. Watch them and see what you can learn and take what might be most comfortable for you. And then push yourself to speak up in strategic moments. If you have an opinion, if you have a thought that you know is going to add value, don't be afraid to jump in and have those conversations. Some people are going to approach this very differently. They are really good at doing it. They're probably not even listening to this episode because they are already good at, navigating politics and all of that. But I want you to remember that while you see people in meetings speaking out and doing all these things and being really visible, it doesn't have to be that way. Building influence can happen in small and consistent ways. And if that works best for you, especially if you're trying to change your mindset, then trust that. Might take a little bit longer, but that's okay if it's going to resonate with who you are and you're going to do it in a way that feels authentic to you. And then finally, we have stage 5, which is high impact habits. These are the consistent habits that we, use in order to grow our career. And the core question here is going to be, how do you stay politically aware without losing yourself? And that's what we've talked about. We want to stay authentic to who we are. If you've been following along for this season, some of these habits are going to align with what we've talked about in previous episodes. And so one is going to be a monthly check-in. I think we're building quite the list at this point. But for this particular topic, you want to ask yourself, am I visible to the right people? And so that's going to be that monthly, possibly weekly, if you're really trying to work on this particular topic. Check in with yourself. Are there meetings I could have been a part of? And talk to your manager about that. And so just making sure that you're not missing opportunities. And if you do, go back and ask yourself why. And then that's something you can work on for the next month. I really love this idea of keeping a relationship tracker of some kind, which sounds weird, but like a professional relationship tracker or, something like that. I need to find a better name for it. But I want you to track who you're connected to and who you need to be connected to. This is a really great exercise for people who are new to this, really trying to figure out their influence within an organization. And so essentially you're writing down everybody that you have connection with in the organization and people you need to have connections with, and see if you can make some connections within that. And so it's just a really good exercise for you to learn who has influence and who can potentially connect you to somebody else. I want you to stop thinking about everything as political. So I want you to take that word out of your mouth when it comes to this. Obviously, I'm using it for the purposes of this topic, but when you're thinking about this within your organization and within your career, I don't want you to think of it as, oh, I'm making political moves. I want you to think about this as intentional positioning. You are intentionally positioning yourself for the next phase of your career, whatever that looks like. And I think that will help take some of the stigma away, especially for some of you who are really trying to do a mindset shift on this topic. And then the last habit that I want you to start just being aware of is your communication. I want you to start aligning your communication style with your visibility goals. So whatever you talked about in terms of this is the goal, this is what I'm trying to do, here's the actions, align your communication to that. Some of us have very straightforward communication styles, and that's good, but also make sure that communication is going to help you reach your goals. So when you're writing any kind of email or report or anything like that, you want to ask yourself, does this report, does this email help me with visibility? And really start to consider that. Okay, this has been, a big topic. I know this is something I work with a lot of my career management clients on. Office politics is always going to be a thing. And it can feel really messy sometimes, especially if there's a lot of drama happening wherever you are at. But ignoring them is really not going to make any of this go away. Being aware of the power dynamics doesn't mean that you're being fake in any way. I think that's sometimes how we feel about it, is like, oh, I'm just building this relationship to get ahead. Well, no, you really should be building that relationship because it's going to help in your position. And then eventually it's going to help moving forward. And you never know when you're going to be able to help that person as well. I cannot tell you how many times I had to I had to advocate for different executive assistants and admins and, program managers and all of that who weren't in the room and were being talked about. And I was advocating for them because I knew the work that they were doing. So this can definitely be reciprocal, again, if you are in the right room. But just remember, this is about being strategic. And that awareness of the office politics, it gives you more control over how you show up, how you advocate for yourself, and how you make career decisions that actually work for you. So if this episode resonated with you, please subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Share this episode with someone who is trying to navigate some of these tricky political dynamics at work. I think they would find great value in this topic. And then make sure to check the show notes for a free resource that is going to help you with the control your career process. It's a nice little worksheet I put together to help you outline some of the thoughts and things that we have talked about today in this episode. Thanks for being here. And until next time, keep taking control of your career.